Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Mark, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Mary, thanks so much for having me. Good morning to you too.
I'm really excited to talk with you today and hear all about your career and your insights into conflict management. But before we get to where you are today, can you tell us about the first job you ever had as a young person?
Will say the first job that I had as a young person that really mattered in terms of developing me in any form or fashion was actually in college. Of course, I worked before college, but the college job as a bartender and server at a restaurant on the University of Tennessee Knoxville campus, or just off the campus, was a great experience on a lot of different levels. But the reason it really mattered to me was that, in serving as a bartender and as a server, you learned how to interact and deal effectively with the general public, intoxicated general public too. And so being just a 19, 20-year-old and learning how to take control of a situation, ease tensions, guide people to happiness. A lot went into that 2 year lesson for me, and I've taken it with me still. I still, and the way I treat servers and bartenders and frankly all people in the service industry stems basically from that experience that I had.
So, did it come naturally to you dealing with unhappy people and helping them to de-escalate themselves to be able to have a good time?
Bizarrely, yeah, I don't really know how or why. It did come naturally to me. Now, of course, I have improved with age. At least I hope, and learn having more skill sets. But that was a good training ground.
Did you have a good manager or a mentor that helped you to figure out how to deal with people that are unhappy and or drunk, or did you learn by a bad example?
I think I give most of the credit of the good things in my world to my father. He was a great mentor. My dad, the way he interacted and dealt with people has formed a lifelong impression upon me. Just a quick story, and then you'll learn more about me probably than you can through any other source. Is my father's son, and Dad grew up in Fayetteville, Tennessee, in the 50s, not too far from where Nathan Bedford Forrest served as the wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And Dad did not come from a lot of means. His father was a manager of a hardware store. And so at the age of 13, grandfather told Dad, "You can go get a job." And so Dad got a job at the age of 13 at a car wash. And he was the only white person working at this car wash. And he formed wonderful relationships and friendships with all the black employees at the car wash. And that made a huge difference for Dad, because after he graduated from UT Knoxville around the age of 21, he was hired at the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, to serve as the manager responsible for the integration of the first line in Winston-Salem, North Carolina around 1961. And he was so successful in melding the whites and the blacks, he made it the most productive line in the history of the company. Uh, he was so successful in that regard. The Bell South in Mobile, Alabama, hired Dad to come down to its facility and integrate one of its departments in around 1964, 65. And so you learn from somebody who has that kind of people skills and empathy and love of individual, and it just bleeds off. I'm sorry for that long story, but it's
No,
important.
that's a beautiful story. And what an absolute gift to have that modeled to you your whole life from somebody,
Right.
and you got to see it up close and personal. What did your dad do that showed that love and that empathy to treat people so well, but also get those kinds of results? What are the kind of concrete things that he did?
It's just dad being dad. I mean, his nickname was Happy. His nickname is Happy. And it meant, and he always has been a very happy, genuine, loving person, and
Mm.
it just has always bled over and made a big difference in my world.
You know, it's so true that that generosity, being genuine is something that we all know you can't fake, right? We know when somebody is blowing smoke, and we know when somebody really means it. And I do think some of the best advice we can give people as they think about their professional career and just their relationships is to work on the self. Like, who are you as you're showing up? So many
Right.
times we think it's the other person. The other person is doing this, the other person needs to change. Well, be that as it may, the question is, who am I continually? How do people feel around me? How do I feel around myself? And the more we do that, we gravitate to those sorts of people who are centered and who are, little balls of love and light. But that
I,
only happens because of the work they've done on themselves or how they care for themselves.
I love that phrase, Mary. Little balls of love and light. That's fantastic. I'm going to borrow that.
Wonderful. All right. So from the bar and server scene at UT, where did you go?
Well, then I went to law school and graduated from law school and went to a large firm for the state of Tennessee here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and stayed with them for 30 years and then
Mm.
broke off in 2019 and founded my own firm.
Why law? Why did you go into law?
I don't know that either, Mary. I sound like a clueless guy, but I just never remember not wanting to be a lawyer. I mean,
Mm.
I don't never had any other thought about anything else. Going back to 12, 13 years old, there was never any other thought in my head. And so I was really blessed in that regard because there was
Mhm.
never any of this uncertainty about what do I want to be, what do I want to do, and how do I get there. It was, I want to be a lawyer. I got to make good grades in order to make that happen. And so I never had any of this uncertainty that confronts so many, especially young people today, when
Mhm.
there's so many different alternatives and avenues available to them.
That really is a blessing. You're right. I mean, so many people that I talk to are, trying to figure it out. What am I supposed to do? What do I want to do? And that uncertainty can just drive people, can paralyze them. And
Right.
so we have this, quote unquote, failure to launch. I know quite a few people, and then of course compounded with COVID, has just really stymied their personal and professional growth. But gosh, that really is a blessing. So you just knew. And did you know what kind of law you wanted to practice from the beginning, or just you wanted to do law?
That I did not know. I had no clue. And I remember I lost a job at an interview. It still makes me, as a 60-year-old man, I still wonder about the person that asked me that question and didn't hire me because I gave him a wrong answer. It was, I think I was just I was a 3L interviewing for a job. And the individual asked me what area of the law and what type of law did I want to practice. And I just honestly said, I don't know. That's what attracts me to your firm is you have so many different types of law. You got a great transactions practice, you got a great litigation practice, and I'm new to this game, and I want to learn and find my lane along the way. And he didn't like the answer, so whatever.
So I'm going to ask you a selfish question because my oldest son is a second year law student, and I think about him going into the world and wanting to be a lawyer, and he's interested in a variety of things. But what would you give? What advice would you give somebody who has just finished law school, passed the bar, going into the world of law? Is there any particular advice you would give them as to how to really be a successful person, not just professional, but person in the law profession?
Listen, listen, absorb, take in as much as you possibly can. You don't know all the answers. You don't know many answers, and so the best way to get answers is from just your interactions and dealings with others. And so listening is the key to life, always, I think.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. That goes all the way through really any profession, but certainly in mediation and conflict resolution, starting from the first principle of listening. I'm okay, let's get curious here.
Mhm.
Everything you said, I'm being curious. I'm going to realize, I know what I know and I know what I don't. I don't even know what I don't know right now.
Right.
Right. So starting from that position, instead of I know, a lot of times I want to start from, I've got all these ideas and I think we should do this and I should, but always starting in that position of listening. That's great advice.
Yep.
So you have been a lawyer your entire career, and you still are a lawyer, and you've gotten in the past 10 years into mediation. Can you tell us about how you found mediation and how you see that with your practice of law?
So I got into mediation, as you said, around 10 years ago because more and more of my litigated cases were getting resolved through settlement. And over that course of that 30-year period, when I was doing nothing but litigating, or approximately 30 years or 25 years, the practice changed so dramatically. I was trying all the lawsuits for the first 10 years of my practice. I had one week where I had two jury trials in one week. So seeing the practice transform, where more and more cases were getting resolved through mediation, just attracted me because I thought that the resolutions were more efficient by mediation than trial, and frankly, just brought better results for everyone involved. And so that attracted me. I want to be part of that success story. And so it's been a wonderful experience for me. I do love being a mediator more than my work as an advocate. I still have a heavy advocacy practice, but I do enjoy, I get more satisfaction in bringing parties to resolution than really beating somebody up in a deposition or a trial.
So I'm thinking that maybe some of our listeners are not quite so sure about these distinctions, being an advocate versus being a mediator and the benefits of mediation instead of having basically your lawyers hash it out or the judge. So what are the benefits of mediation?
Well, you get to bring your own certainty. You get to make your own decision and decide what is enough for you. Whereas if you try the case, you're putting all of the results in the hands of 12 people that really don't care about you. They're there to do a job. And I have found, all in all, vast majority of jurors do their dead level best and usually get it right as far as I'm concerned. So it's not a slap to our judicial system by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that we've evolved, and the evolution to conflict resolution through parties coming together for one day, maybe 2 days, and taking off their armor and putting down their weapons and truly listening to what the adversary has to say, uh, and making decisions based upon that additional information so that you make the most informed decision. That is a great opportunity for litigants, and it's
I
it's, it's less costly.
hmm Yeah, I mean, I think we want to, in any profession we're in, we want to minimize damage. And, when people are caught up in a lawsuit, or so I think obviously a lot about workplaces because that's what I deal with. And so much we want to offload the decision making to somebody else, to the manager, to the whoever, because I think we live in a culture where we aren't really empowered to solve our own problems, or we think I'm right, this other person's going to agree with me, and now we're going to force this other person to comply. But I love what you said is that we can get together with other people and we end up hearing things we didn't know. There's information out there, which is typically the other person's point of view, what the other person deems as relevant facts or how much value to put on those particular facts. And I think the more we can start that change idea of empowering every worker to solve his or her problems. And when those parties can't do it, do some sort of facilitated conversation and then maybe escalate that to a mediation. And then eventually, if we need something else, but those things as a last resort, right?
Right.
Going, the jury is the last resort instead of the first, where so much of the default still in this culture is, well, I'm going to go before a judge. I'm going to get this resolved because we all have this desire to be seen for justice. And yet we don't usually start with what you've said, listening. That means listening to the other party who has harmed us, hurt us, not understood us in some kind of way.
Right. People ask me what I do, and I've started telling people that I get paid well to solve civil problems for adults who can't solve them on their own. And I do that as an advocate, and I do it as a mediator and as an arbitrator. And I've gotten to this point where I think that all litigants that are trying cases in front of jurors is just litigants that failed to take an opportunity to figure out a resolution that was mutually acceptable. Now, sometimes you're going to run across the individual that cannot find reason in a paper bag, and we run across those people from time to time, and they are what they are, and you just have to go tee it up and let a juror tell them what reason is.
So often we just assume the other person who's caused us pain in some way is that person. Like we jump immediately to the other person's unreasonable because if they were reasonable, they wouldn't have done this or they wouldn't have done that. And so we already spin, why should I even talk to that person? Because we just want to bypass them, right? And yet I've been coming back to just this basic idea of the golden rule. Well, if I have hurt somebody or somebody's upset with me, what would I want them to do? I would want them to come talk to me. I would want to have them talk to me in a way that I might be open to listening, right? So not just
Right.
venting at me, but that's what we would all hope instead of somebody jumping, jumping up and escalating it. Because especially if you're dealing with any kind of ongoing relationship, that just causes further division and damage instead of stopping, listening, and finding that mutually acceptable path forward because we are still going to be moving forward. And in our families or at work, we're going to see them the next day. So, why do you
If you
think?
listen enough, you can find the thread that's buried deep, deep down in the controversy. And if you can find the thread or threads that are the genesis of the true controversy that's bringing about this kind of strong emotion. Uh, but that takes a lot of digging, it takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of listening to try to find that thread or those threads, rather than just dealing with the surface emotions that are so uh, the majority of what the individual or individuals want to focus upon.
Mhm. And that is hard because people are just dying to be heard and they want to tell their story, which they have told their story to themselves over and over and to their loved ones, and they want you to hear their story. And yet it is true. They feel like they're giving it all to you, but it's really digging deeper and asking these other kinds of underlying questions and getting them to move right from these positions to interests. And it takes time. I think one thing that can be frustrating about this kind of work and conflict is that the messiness of people and that it does take time. And I've been thinking, and I wanted to get your thoughts. People in this space, in mediation and in ADR, are interested in the intersection of AI. How can we use AI in our practices? And I mean, I do love technology. I love people more. And I understand the wanting to streamline emails and other kind of processes to spend more time with people. But what do you see going on there with this embracing, almost like wholesale embracing of AI, and yet the time it really does take to be with people? How do you see that balance?
I think AI is a wonderful tool if used appropriately, as is the case with all tools. And I view AI as a kind of an idiot savant that can help you with some tedium. It can help you get through more effectively, really administrative tasks, some tasks that really they rob you of your time to really devote to more complex resolution of problems and presentation of ideas. So, obviously, when you're using it for the administrative tasks or the less complicated task, and frankly, it's getting better and better even with complexity. So I continue to be amazed by what it can accomplish, but always, always double check it because it will try to please you, and in trying to please you, it will create sometimes out of whole cloth. And so be very wary of it,
Yeah.
but I embrace it. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful tool.
Yeah, I mean, I use it almost daily in my practice, and yet you do have to be careful. If you don't know what you're looking for, then you're not going to be able to judge the information that you get. So you already have to have a certain level of competence in whatever field it is, um, or just what's sort of reasonable. So if I'm asking about a particular company or this, that, or the other, and they give me some information, I'm like, I'm not quite so sure about that, right?
Right.
And yeah, so I love it in the sense of using it as an assistant. And yet there really is obviously no substitute for a person is going to be heard by a person. I do
Right.
think some programs can help us, like logic problems, if this, then that, trying to help the individual to get clear about a particular issue. But a lot of times I think we want to solve issues apart from the person that we're having the problem with. We want to just solve it and move on, but the way through is through, right? Especially when and of course, some issues are monetary and you're never going to see that person again and you don't need to be face to face with them. I mean, there are times, obviously, when we can solve things relatively independently. But when it comes to anything that involves a sustained relationship, the only way through is through, and the solution is found through the interaction with that other person. So how do you balance that? I mean, the messiness of humans and the time that it takes with, we only have so much time devoted to this mediation.
Yeah. It's funny. I had a mediation. I'll never forget. It's been about 2 years ago when this was just such a an emotional reaction to me by an adjuster for an insurance company who was furious with me as a mediator because I had, quote, spent too much time, in quote, with the plaintiff. I went, really? I spent too much time listening to your adversary so that I could, number one, make her feel heard, better understand her complexities, her emotions, her issues, so I could better discuss matters with you. Is that what you're telling me? And she backed down pretty quickly. But I was just raw with that because it had been a long time with this plaintiff. And, I'm a human too, and you can only take in so much. It was so much I actually had to take a 15-minute break from her just to ground myself all over again because it was a lot.
Yeah.
But it worked. And I think it would not have worked. Well, the plaintiff's attorney told me, after the mediation, he said, wow, she needed every single ounce of that energy you gave her.
Mhm. It is amazing, what the outcome is going to be has so much to do with, did the person feel heard? Were their questions answered? That human interaction that can help guide them to, so many times when people come into a mediation, that they want the sky. They want what they want, right? Um,
Christmas,
right. That's right.
a new
Santa
bike, and I want to,
That's right. That's right. And of course, so much in conflict resolution is helping people de-escalate, but then also align expectations with, what's reasonable and why that is reasonable, and in helping people through that process. So when you think about your career, can you tell us about a professional, um, a mentor that you've had that helped you navigate, or maybe even getting better at mediation?
Well, my mentor when I started the practice of law was a senior partner in the firm, Tom Williams, and I learned more from Tom Williams in starting my practice than anyone else, probably all put together. So I give him a lot of credit because I remember sitting in his office when he was talking to very, very difficult client, and just listening to how he took in all the negative that the client was dosing out and how he subtly changed the narrative and brought the client down to the ground and moved on to really an action plan going forward. And it was magical to watch. And I just, from the get-go, I said, this is how I need to handle difficult people.
So what are some tips? Like what are some things that you saw him do, or what are some things that you do when you have somebody who is very escalated and they want this, everything in the world to bring them down to be able to move forward?
Well, the best way to de-escalate is not engage and not let that individual drive your emotional narrative. You've got to be in control. If you're not in control of yourself, how are you in control the emotion that's just being dumped on you?
Mm.
That's number one for me. Number two is being very issue focused. Because oftentimes an individual who's highly inflamed or emotional will want to talk about everything. And what really has to be, you got to focus on what do we really have to address in order to get from point A to point B. And we're not going to spin out of control and talk about C, D, E, and F and G, which really are so tangential to getting from A to B that we're not being productive with our time. So I guess controlling your emotions so that you can control the situation, and then being very issue focused. So you work that logic into the resolution. But emotion is the most powerful force. Logic is rarely ever going to contain or make emotions subside. Um, but effectively using logic once you've taken control of the emotional element is the only path forward as far as I've been able to discern. What about
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it is through helping somebody to, really what do you want? All right. I want that person fired. Right. Okay. Okay, well, what's reasonable? What do you think is reasonable? And when you start helping that person move forward, what is it that you want? It can help them, they're moving away from their emotional aspect because now their brain has to start working like, okay, what do I want? Right. And, so I try to help prepare the other person. Well, you're going to hear things that you disagree with and that you don't like. So we're going to need to focus on the future. Right. And
Yeah.
so, obviously in mediation, you don't usually just meet right with the parties. You've got all this prep work for them to help move them through that emotion. They got to get it out. Right. One problem I see a lot with employers, managers, is they just want to say, okay, the past is the past. What are we doing next? Yes, you want to get there, but you can't start there because that person's just ruminating. It's just spinning, spinning, spinning. You haven't been heard. But they do usually want to give you not just A and B, but the kitchen sink, right? And so allowing that for so long, and that's something I definitely need to get better at. Cutting
All
that
of us.
off. Once I start circling back around, it's like, okay, so now we're going to move on future oriented. And I think with difficult individuals, and I do think somebody is difficult simply if they're difficult for you. It's not necessarily about that person, because obviously we are not here to diagnose anybody. But if that person is difficult for you or for the person that you're meeting it with, it's not focusing on their personality, but the specific behaviors. What are the specific, concrete behaviors you want to see this week, next week, into the future? What does that actually look like in the everyday? And really trying to start imagining that and then negotiating once you get in the joint mediation. And that can help. The emotions, of course, still come up, but help them to navigate, okay, what is tomorrow going to look like in those?
Mary, that's just beautiful advice. I couldn't agree more.
It's hard to do in practice. I
It
find
is so hard.
I find mediation very, very difficult. And a lot of it is, I think, though, as a mediator, emptying yourself. Um, I know an empathetic person, I'm an empathetic person, and you have to have that, but getting caught up does nobody any good. I remember vividly one of my first mediations, I started crying and I felt horrible because I'm like, this is not about me. And yet when somebody is telling me something really painful, yeah, I just get into their story and I just have that response. Mark, if you started crying right now, I would probably start crying right now, right? So I just, but that is something that I've had to work on is this, how do I empty myself and remain myself so that I can be in control, right? I don't get swept up into their emotions or one side, right? And yeah.
But I think having that kind of strong empathy, Mary, I mean, I know from what you said, you're trying to control that and maybe not express it so much. But if it's real and it's genuine, and it allows you to connect, so long as you can then come around and, as you said, or as I said, center yourself
Mhm.
again, so that again you're back in control of your emotions. And I think that's a wonderful trait to have.
Right, as long as you don't get lost in it, right? And
Right.
and luckily I didn't get lost. I was able to, pull it back around. It was embarrassing. I felt embarrassed, but then again, that's me getting lost in my own head. And so obviously it's so wonderful to be around a bunch of mediators because you will never be listened to like you are listened to in a group full of mediators because that's what they do. And the gift, the gift of listening to somebody. And that's what I would say to anybody who's dealing with a conflict at work is that if you want to make progress with that colleague that is you're finding difficult, if you can find it within yourself to get in a space to actually listen to them and say something like, hey, when you said this about me at the meeting, what's going on? And instead of what's going on, I'm showing you you're such a bad person, but like, no, what is going on and listening to them.
Mhm.
It's amazing the transformation that happens within ourselves. Because first
Yep.
of all, we've moved from the narrative of, they are wholly the problem to how can I work with this person?
You're trying to understand rather than
Yeah,
attack.
yeah. And that can be difficult when we get our defenses up because somebody has harmed us. So
Mhm.
Mark, you've had a long career. Certainly you've had some conflicts with colleagues. Can you tell us about a difficulty you've had at work and how you solved it?
Yeah, go out on my own and take my paralegal of 17 years with me. But no, experiences I've had with difficult colleagues. Yeah, we've all had experiences. If you've worked with people in any kind of environment, even if it's a very small environment, you're going to have conflict with people. And I guess I'm looking at it as more of um, every conflict that I've had can also be an opportunity to form a better relationship with the individual
Mm.
and put it on the individual's shoulders to either to just lose the relationship, but it's not going to be me. I have a friend and I borrow his saying all the time. There are only two people in the world. There are my friends and people that I want to be my friends, and
Mm.
so I'm not gonna I'm gonna do my dead level best to not be the enemy to anyone and not be the source of them wanting to be my enemy, but I want them to be my friend or at least have reasonable level of respect so that we can have a cordial relationship.
I'm very interested in professionalism at work. Like, what does it mean to be a good colleague? And to be a good colleague does not mean that everybody that we work with, we want to go out and have drinks with, right? Or that we want to have over for Thanksgiving. That's not what it means. That's lovely. And sometimes we find ourselves in those situations where we just really mesh professionally and personally. But that's not necessary in order to have a high functioning, respectful environment. And I think what you're saying is quite mature about, it's up to you to be friendly towards others, to be a good colleague, and they can reciprocate or not reciprocate. So, have you ever had the experience of somebody being repeatedly disrespectful to you or willfully misunderstanding you and being an obstructionist? This is a situation that quite a few people face.
Yeah, and there's one individual in particular, and he just was just one of those people. And it wasn't just me. He ended up leaving the firm. Everybody was happy they left the firm. He just he abided in a very negative space, and I've always felt for him because it's sad to watch someone be the master of its own destruction and sadness. But some people seem to wallow in that world, and I'm just grateful that I'm grateful it's not me.
Yeah, I think those people are far and few between, but most of us encounter those people at work. And I too find it. I've had some experiences like that. I want to be friends with everybody. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that while I will remain open to people, it's also okay if they say no, right? If they are not in a space or their particular behaviors so misalign with my own values that what was a friendship is is no longer going to be possible in order for me to stay true to my values. Like I will bend quite a bit for people because I really believe in living and let living, but that also means self-care, right? I don't need to put myself in a situation or be inauthentic, which I can fall into that trap when I want to be friendly with people who have maybe a different understanding of what collegiality or is, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you're. I mean, you only have so much. At least I only have so much energy, and so I'm not going to lose too much energy fighting a lost cause. So I don't mind putting some arm's length interaction and distance on every level from those few people. Respect is the it's non-negotiable. So if I'm being treated with disrespect, that is the end point for me. I mean, how can you be a functioning adult, let alone professional lawyer, mediator, arbitrator, and sacrifice respect or credibility? You just can't. Those are just fundamental. It's got to be your essence. It's got to be everything about you.
One thing that I see in organizations is that the organizational culture doesn't have a way to deal with incivility at work. And so incivility is, I think, just another way of talking about being disrespectful.
Mhm.
And so you see people within organizations trying, but the system in a way is stacked against them or won't support them in them standing up for themselves and saying this particular behavior from this person is unacceptable. And yet not everybody has the luxury of being able to leave a job for whatever reason, right? Because of family issues, location issues. Do you have any advice from a professional mediator as to what somebody ought to do when they find themselves in an office or within an organization and they are being treated in they are being treated in a way that is uncivil, and yet they need to stay, they can't just leave.
I feel for those people because they've just got so much to learn, but it's not overwhelming if they focus on just a couple of key things that they've got to do, they've got to be able to master in order to develop enough and to put that offensive behavior off. And I think one is complete honesty and candor. If you're not dealing with the truth and addressing a negative situation, then you're never going to get from point A to point B.
Mm.
And having I guess the guts or wherewithal, emotional strength to confront the issue or issues directly, not attack, but confront directly by getting a better understanding about what's driving it and then deciding how can I navigate through this. And one of the books I read that I recommend to everyone is a book called Crucial Conversations. And so I just got such great advice in that. So I think if anybody who's listening is struggling with how to deal with conflict resolution, I start with Crucial Conversations. I found it invaluable. Mary, have you read that book?
I have. In fact, we are both on the Tennessee Association for Professional Mediators board, and I'm working with a local organization, and we're gonna hopefully give them a grant through Chatham, and I'm gonna have all the workers have that book
Yeah.
because it is just such a great resource. And I was looking through it again as I was putting together a library for this group, and it's amazing how much, I'm like, that is so much of my practice from that book. I forgot because I've read so much that it is really, really quite a good book. And I like a variety of things that you said. And one of them is emotional maturity, emotional regulation. And confronting. I think so many times when somebody is causing us difficulty at work, we just write it off and we either ignore it or we do something so that we don't confront it. And many of the people that I come in contact with in through my work, they are self-described as avoidant, a conflict avoidant, that conflict makes them uncomfortable and so they don't deal with it. And so because we feel like if I say something, I'm going to make it worse. If I say something, they're going to come across as attacking. I'm attacking them. Yet it's, I think, quite the opposite. When we develop those conflict competencies, it's not about them. We're not in charge of their emotions, but it's about us and about advocating for ourselves. And the more that we see that, the more we are able to de-escalate, figure out what the situation is, and then say it to this other person. When you do this, this is how I feel, what's going on, or being able to speak up for yourself. And that is so incredibly empowering. And it diffuses the whoever is being a thorn in your side because you can you could just see them differently and you're not at their mercy anymore because you've given them all this power when you think there's nothing I can do. There is almost always something you can do. And a lot of it, what I do is just a mental trick of just thinking that must be terrible to feel that way. It must be terrible to have isolated yourself. Well, no wonder they're reacting this way because they've burned all these bridges in the organization and now nobody will collaborate with them or whatever it might be, instead of they're doing this to me.
Yeah, cumulative slights, or it's like death by a thousand cuts. And every single time a person lets a significant slight, and it's significant in my world if it brings you down emotionally, if it negatively impacts you emotionally, then every single time you allow that emotional baggage to grow and grow and grow, you put yourself at risk of number one, fatigue, and number two, lashing out because you hit a tipping point that
Mhm.
you never had to hit if you just dealt with it regularly, openly, and honestly. And in doing so, you regulate the conversation, you manage the relationship, and you don't let someone think that they can get away with that disrespect, that incivility. So I think it's about, you said it perfectly. It's about taking control of your own advocacy for yourself.
And the sooner you do it, the less there is to address. I mean, that's the wonderful thing that as soon as something you find significant, you articulate it, it's not as soon as 2 years later, right? And now it is the kitchen sink because they've done this, they've done this, they've done this over a sustained period of time. In a way, whose fault is that? Well, you are largely to blame in the sense that you never spoke up. And so we're always telling people how it's okay to treat us, right? What is acceptable behavior? And we're continually shocked when we see somebody being incivil or unprofessional. And yet, if we haven't said anything, maybe that is also shocking. What's going on that I haven't spoken up? Or what if my organization really is punitive if I were to speak up? I need to be actively looking. And that's what I love about conflict resolution is that it helps you become unstuck. All of a sudden you see possibilities. And it's always getting out of these positions. And they're so myopic. We could only see this one thing. And conflict resolution is so freeing and empowering and future focused that there are these different options available to you. So let's explore that.
Yeah, I agree. That's it's just think about what proper parenting or proper pet ownership. We've all seen the parent who appropriately and promptly addresses the intolerable behavior of a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, and on and on and on, or addresses the unruly dog. If you do it regularly and firmly uh, and appropriately, you end up raising good kids, good pets. But if you let it just run amok for any appreciable length of time, all you're doing is letting the dog or the kid find that that conduct acceptable. And then you get then you get 6 months later, you get a slap on the face, not a slap, but you need a reprimand, and it's inconsistent, it's confusing. So it was fine. Nothing was said 6 months ago. All of a sudden, I'm getting this really heated response to what I've been doing for the past 6 months. I don't understand. So it's just you become part of creating the bad environment by accepting it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so the more that we can emotionally regulate and the more that we're self-reflective, right? So it's all about who am I? And really trying to assess. Aristotle calls it proper pride. What do I get right? So really understanding what you're doing well, and then also assessing, proper humility with the things that I need to work on. And the more that we are really trying to judge that, then the more we're going to be able to say, oh, this other person's behavior is not okay with me. And now I can try to ask why. Is that a problem in me? Do I need to expand? Or is it really something that, especially at work, steps out the bounds of what is acceptable behavior here? So the quicker we notice it, instead of being like the lobster in the boiling pot, where, right, a lot of times a person yelling at a meeting, it's not, they didn't just come in and that was that thing that's, that was the thing. It was the thing that set them off. Right. And it could have been addressed a long time ago.
Yeah, I love the word you used, humility. If you're always the smartest person in the room, you're probably the dumbest person in the room. So you need to be really careful if it's always about you correcting someone else's behavior. I like your question is what role might I be playing in this? And that coming at the disagreement with a certain level of humility, a certain level of true interest about what am I doing? What am I saying? How am I acting that is feeding this type of response or attack by you? Help me understand this because
Mhm.
I want to move past it. If you're truly genuine and you're truly trying to figure it out, then you're not just going to be attacking and saying, this is what you always do. This is why you're always wrong. This is why I can't be around you because this is what you do. If it's just that kind of you,
Mhm.
I'd be really self-aware enough to ask the question, might there be something that I'm doing that's triggering this? Because I'm not seeing it. You don't do this with other people. Why me?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And when we don't address it, then we're less likely to address it because it has spiraled out of control and we are now just blaming this other person and it's just this huge thing. And so it's just so much easier to solve the problem that happened that week or that month than something that happened quite some time ago, but really to see to take responsibility as is and but not to take it all and not to take none of it. It's I always think about like a little pie. I think about conflict. How much is it me, and what part am I? And if it's illegal behavior, it's not you. If it's, somebody has committed a crime against you, but I'm talking about everyday work environments, right? So what part have you contributed? And then of course the organizational, what's going on in the organization that is allowing this particular person to show up in this way, and there isn't accountability for this action, or just trying to lay it all out so that you're willing to have that genuine conversation. That genuine conversation is harder and harder the more you compound that person's sins against you, so to speak. But, and that's one reason to do it, so that we're more likely to do it if we catch it early.
Yeah.
So, Mark, my last question for you, which I'd like to end, is as you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only everyone is treated with dignity and respect at work, but that people are encouraged to thrive and flourish?
I would say disconnect from a lot of television, disconnect from a lot of social media. I think that a lot of news and a lot of social media uh, is breeds a certain level of it's all about me, it's all about mine, it's all about I, and and people stop listening. They stop truly thinking, and those platforms where you can do simple sound bites and feel really happy about the slight you just levied against someone in the World Wide Web, it's just not productive to any type of personal growth on any level. And so I would say that the more that you can read great literature, the more that you can read great news magazines and papers that are thoughtful and engaging and help foster a dialogue, then you have a better chance of not falling into bad habits, not shutting down emotionally and intellectually, but growing and learning that the dialogue, the real dialogue that you can have with another intelligent person should be the most rewarding interaction that you have with anyone as far as I'm concerned. Because it's once I know it's not about just me being right, but it's me having a really wonderful conversation with my friend Mary, then I get more out of my interaction with Mary from Mary than I do whatever I gave Mary.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, the power of the dialogue. I believe that the quality of our life has to do with the quality of our relationships, and quality relationships has to do with the dialogue. It's not I'm talking at you, you're talking at me, but it is that third way that emerges, whether or not we're trying to solve a problem, but that when I talk to you and I listen to you, I learn something which then I put forward in some kind of way is that dialectical approach. And that's what relationships are. It's not just two people, but there's something that emerged. It's this emergent quality that happens when we have satisfying relationships. And no matter what career we have, I mean, that's secondary to the good life is a life lived in community, and a good community is about having relationships. And I love that you talked about reading, because we can start that narrative process of dialogue. Because when you read, what happens to your own brain is that you are in dialogue with other people and other stories, and the imagination, right? We need imagination to solve any problem, to be in relationship, because it isn't just about me, right? I'm one way of being, but the more we have an imagination, the more we're able to enter into, I think, these satisfying relationships with others. So
Completely agree.
I love that. Mark, thank you so much for your time and for talking with me today.
Always enjoy my time with you, Mary. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Mark, for being on Conflict Managed. I just absolutely adore talking with like-minded individuals who love mediation and are really working towards trying to help people solve their own problems. And we all need to do that, myself included. I am still definitely on the way, but thank you, Mark, so much for your time. Conflict Managed is produced by third-party workplace conflict restoration services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. I'm delighted to say that we are on YouTube, so you can watch this conversation with Mark and I. You can find us on YouTube at 3P Conflict Restoration. Come back, we have new episodes every Tuesday. If you haven't had a chance to check out my latest book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do and considers what we ought to do instead to have healthy work environments. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.